You got all, everything is set up? Ladies, is everything set up? Great. Okay, so now we're going to go to New York City. Oh, that's changed. Cross country. And we're going to, the last two projects are dealing with New York City under two different conditions. So Zain will take us to New York and talk about shelter.
Yeah. Test. Okay, cool. Hello everyone, my name is Zain Shah, and this is my project, Help to Shelter, Rethinking Natural Disaster Architecture as a Foundation, not the Future. So, picture, if you will, this scenario. A natural disaster has just been announced in the news, and you've been asked to leave your home. Leaving behind the life you've built up, the friends you've made, all the things that all the experiences you've had in your home. And you're asked to evacuate to one of these centers where all you're really given is a gurney and a lot of space with a lot of other people in a similar situation. For some people, especially in Katrina, this wasn't an option. They got stranded on highways or outside of these centers because of poor communication with governing bodies. What I'm trying to solve here is a problem that's not really thought about on an everyday basis. It's the problem of how do we create a shelter that protects people that needs to protect people who are supposed to be protected during these disasters. The goal of this thesis is to develop a facility that can both shelter its intended population as well as engage with that community. We're trying to create a place that not only protects people, but helps make them feel like they're a part of something. To this end, I've designed a community center that has a quick and easily configurable space into a disaster shelter. So in order to kind of begin my investigations, I started by researching Katrina and New Orleans. And through my research, I identified three things that I think that governing bodies didn't really do a proper job in. So the first one being there was poor communication and engagement with the governing bodies, with the people that were going to be in service with the shelters. So because there was a lack of communication between the New Orleans government and the people who needed to evacuate, some people didn't know where they were supposed to go, some people didn't trust the news and didn't evacuate on time, and were left to only really get away on the last day. Another issue was a poor implementation of the evacuation strategies that were in place. So originally, the plan was for the government to bring in buses to move people out of New Orleans and away from the disaster sites. However, they didn't order the right amount of buses. Buses came late, and they were all brought to the same place. There was a lot of miscommunication in the planning. And then finally, kind of going off that last idea, we had all these people brought to one singular place. And because of that, there wasn't enough space and there wasn't enough prepared sheltering options for people. So these are the three kind of issues that I identified. Looking at centers themselves, really if we look at this image, you can see right off the bat some of the main issues. There's no privacy in these places. For people who have just had to leave their homes, there's nowhere for them to really kind of like be to themselves or feel a sense of give them a private moment. There's really a sense of comfort in these spaces. You're literally left out in these large open-end places surrounded by people suffering, and there's nothing really there to comfort you except for a thin piece of fabric and a gurney. And there's no services in these locations. These are just sprung up at the last minute, set up by FEMA or the National Guard, and don't have any sort of like facilities to help with daily needs. And really there's an overall lack of preparedness. While yes, there is plans to bring goods and services to these locations, there's nothing there's nothing there at the moment. People have to wait days to get proper care. So looking at these different factors, I was left with 3 sort of goals for the thesis. I wanted to design a location that would really engage with the community so that people felt comfortable coming to those locations and knew what they were. By creating sort of rapport between the building and the people it's servicing, we can actually start to create a situation where people are comfortable coming to the spaces and not feeling like these are just random places they've been shoved aside to. Secondly, I wanted to create a space that was easily convertible in these disasters. So unlike these places that just pop up at the last minute, these spaces are planned for this situation. They have rooms and programs in place for how they will convert and how they will house people during a disaster. And finally, I wanted to try and I want to give people services within the facility that could help with their daily needs, as well as give people that privacy that they need in these times. So in terms of where this project takes place, I'm sure a lot of you, when Professor Dupree said this was taking place in Manhattan, were like, what? That doesn't sound like a place for a disaster kind of shelter. But actually, I think that picking Manhattan kind of shows you that this is actually a problem that is a global issue. So if any of you guys remember Hurricane Sandy a few years ago, even though the hurricane didn't come to New York, the effects of its proximity, caused so much disaster for New Jersey and New York. Here I just brought this graphic here to kind of highlight some of the issues that happened during the disaster. So this blue area you can see where flooding was all around. The red, these triangles here show where there were subway stations that were completely flooded. There was a transformer here that stopped functioning, caused power outages across Manhattan. And there's a hospital that, because of that power outage, had to divert all its patients from its location and transfer them across the city. So you can see that natural disasters can cause large-scale problems, even with such a large-scale city as Manhattan. Because of Hurricane Sandy and other disasters, New York developed what they call their own evacuation strategy. And here I'm showing a graphic that shows the different evacuation zones based on risk. If we compare that to this income map here, you can see right here, this is where our lower income population is. If we compare that against each other, you can see that these areas are extremely vulnerable to natural disasters. Comparing that against the 100-year flood plan, you can see that these areas over here are extremely susceptible to natural disaster and flooding. Now, comparing that to what their current plan is, this is the center that's supposed to service all of this area. So all of these people who are at risk are serviced by one singular building. Now, my plan is, instead of having just one building that services this large population, instead, why don't we break it into smaller, more manageable chunks so that each community has their own sort of space that really kind of manages that population. And then those original evacuation locations can then become where the overflow goes. So when people are evacuating, they go to the smaller centers and then to the larger centers. And as people are able to return home, those larger centers can be emptied and brought to the smaller centers. For this project, I'll be looking at this specific region here and kind of designing a center to service this population. So who is this? So this is the Lower East Side. The site that I selected is right here. And when I was looking at sort of this location, I tried to look at what kind of community this area had. So this map shows all sorts of different types of buildings and services that are already on the site. So there's multiple different schools. There's a lot of different community spaces like artist places, recreational and culturally significant places, as well as plenty of religious institutions. And there's only one library right here, if you can see it. So I wanted to create something that kind of engaged all these different creative types. There's also this recreational strip right across here, which has things like outdoor basketball courts, tennis courts, and things like that. Now, what I wanted to do is try to see if my center could help engage those by creating a place that we could organize different recreational events. In terms of the sheltering opportunities, here you can see we have lots of different medical facilities such as hospitals, pharmacies, and there's even an elderly care building over here, as well as one police station and one fire station over there that can help us with evacuation efforts. The blue areas mark different markets, places that we can get large quantities of food and bring them to the center to help kind of like bring on-site food to our center. And here you can see sort of our transit opportunities. So lots of bus routes, lots of subway stations that people can use to get to our site. And those all together, I tried to create a program that engaged all these different communities. So for the community center, there were three main sort of types of floors that I created. So recreation, learning, and community. So recreation had things like the basketball courts, a locker room for the people who are using the facilities, and small recreational spaces. Learning spaces like maker spaces and a library. And the community spaces are places like exhibition and auditorium that are there to help to create places that people or communities can come and bring their communities into the space. On the right, we have our disaster shelter program, which is things such as, of course, sleeping spaces, as well as relaxation spaces, places for people to take showers and daily services, as well as places to take care of children while parents kind of work on rebuilding or figuring out what they need to do next. So now the big issue is how do we kind of get these two different programs to mix into one sort of building. So to that end, I actually researched, or rather looked at two precedents that really helped me thinking about how this place can transform. So the first is the My Micro NY, which is a micro housing in Manhattan. So what they do with their units, which really got me thinking, was this idea of the canvas and the toolbox. This idea is basically you have an area which has all your services, while one area is your space that is more malleable, can change its program. So here you can see examples of how that works. You can have a bedroom at one day and a dining hall at the next. Another project I looked at was the Domestic Transformer by Gary Chang, which is his personal apartment in China. What I liked about this project is that what it does is it uses moving parts of the moving walls and partitions that change the program of this very small apartment. So you have these partitions that move back and forth that allow you to select what kind of program you want. So these two precedents led me to these two concepts in terms of design for the canvas and the toolbox and compressive spaces. So now we need to bring these into how we designed the community center. So here is the design of the center itself. Here's the ground floor of the center. So on the main thing that I wanted to kind of look at first is these what I'm calling service areas, which become service towers. So these areas right here are our toolbox, the canvas and toolbox idea. So here's where our vertical spaces, our storage areas, our bathrooms, things like that, and all those areas that are tucked away that allow these larger areas to kind of function. By using this, we're able to move people across the building and change the functions of each floor. So on the first floor, we have on the right is our daycare, which is for young children and such. So during its normal day function, the center can actually take care of children and things like that. But during a disaster, when parents need to go and figure out what their next steps are, they can bring their children here to be taken care of. On the right, this is this smaller space is our administrative area, which is just how the center organizes itself, as well as having a small security room for monitoring the building itself that could be used for security. So in terms of the this design, we have this grand entryway in the front that leads you into the first floor. And when you enter this space, you are greeted by this what is our reception kiosk on each floor. So this acts as sort of your organizer, or rather this is sort of like not only the floors kind of like administrative block, as well as like the security for each floor. Once you pass by it, you are able to get into each one of the different functional spaces on each different floor, which we'll start to go through now. So during on the second floor, we have our exhibition spaces. So all those different art communities and like cultural places could bring in different kinds of exhibitions to help activate this space.
Where is the exhibition space? Can you define that?
Yeah, here and here.
I see. What's that in?
That is an area looking down to the auditorium area, which is specifically for large-scale community events, such as like if you wanted to have like a town hall, or if you wanted to do a small performance. But yeah, it's got 2 floors, so you can look down into that space. If we, this floor actually, we can look at sort of the idea of this rest space as well. So on each floor, we have this small brown area right here, which is sort of a seating area where people can relax on each floor, as well as this outdoor green area. People can kind of like have a moment to themselves in this building. And you can see it goes all the way up in the building. You can look down into it from here. And as well as we have another green space on top that we'll talk about next. It's a private space for people. Here is really the typical floor for the shelter, where you have, here we are looking at the library. So on this side we have the library, which is, which runs for 2 floors. And it's, the bookshelves are on these sliding sort of tracks. So, and on the left and right are different study spaces. So with this building, each floor actually as it goes through a transformation phase. So you've seen these 2 plans right next to each other. Right here we can see the units that are for the for dormitory space that we'll discuss in a little bit. But I want to show you sort of how each floor transforms itself. So here we're going to the idea of the compressible space. So each floor has an area that sort of pushes the community center program into a smaller storage area so that it can bring out these dormitory spaces. And how that functions is as such. So each, so all the different like furniture and such gets moved into these different corner areas, as well as the program here being pushed back into a smaller storage area. Then from these different storage rooms, we bring out these assemblable dormitory units that will go into a little bit more detail once we've gone through the different programs.
Went to that, Zain?
Yeah. Yeah, so these are the dormitory units. And so floors like this is the makerspace, which is designed to have a very flexible floor plan where you could have tools that could be used to make things or design things. And during a disaster, this area could transform into a dormitory, and the tools can be used during to help with construction or repair. And then we have the next floor, which is the locker rooms for the recreational area, which provides showers and other sort of showers for people in the center during disaster, as well as lockers to store things. We have the gymnasium, which is just a large-scale space that can be converted into dormitories. And then at the top, we have our rooftop garden space, which can act as a large-scale event or area for the community center to use. Or during disaster, we have a place for you to go outside and to seek comfort and outside, just fresh air. So these are the different units that we saw on each floor that convert. What these are easily assemblable dormitory space. So here you can see a typical sort of side room that converts. What happens is we move the current furniture out of each one of these spaces and start to bring in the different pieces that help to assemble it. From there, it's assembled into its shape, or it's then attached with Allen wrenches and connection pieces. From there, we bring in these small duffel bag size containers which hold assemblable beds, which transform as such. These beds can also turn into a couch. And then we also provide small containers for people to store their goods, so like personal effects, blankets, pillows, flashlights, things that people need or brought with them. And then on each one of the floors, we reveal small charging, or rather outlets for people to charge their equipment, things like phones and laptops. And then over top, the lights for each one of the units is active, can be turned on and off with so that each person can control their environment. So to kind of wrap up this presentation, so what we did here today, we looked at the current way that Manhattan evacuates people from during a disaster, and tried to propose our own way to manage things in much smaller, manageable sectors. We tried to create a center that engages the community so that people who use the center know and feel comfortable within it. We designed a space that is able to easily transform itself from one program to the other. And we've provided services and tools that people could use within these centers so that they are able to not only have their basic needs, but hopefully use them towards anything that they need in terms of recovery. And we created spaces that provide privacy, as well as spaces that provide places where you can have comfort. And that's my presentation. Thank you all for coming. Yes?
I just have a point of question here, a couple. If that's the Sarah Roosevelt part running down the middle of Christie Street?
No, this is
Okay. I'm trying to see, over there, it looks like your site isn't against the recreation space.
Right, it's not against it. So this is actually, there's
So-
another green strip across the street.
Oh, I see, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like 2
All
streets
right,
down.
so I understand. And then the other kind of elephant in the living room, only because you haven't mentioned it, is what is the building adjacent to you, and where is that ramp going?
Okay. So what this is yeah. So what this is that there is housing on the other side that is not a part of this project. So what that is we're acknowledging that its existence there, but we're not engaging with it in terms of the program. That's its own sort of building.
But it has parking that goes underneath of your building?
So so there was there was an original building here. We added a parking space that goes down into the basement of this building.
So can you, like, what is the existing building, all of this?
Yeah, so this gray area here is our, there was an existing population that we're housing on this site.
But is this access part of the original building or part of your building?
It's an addition.
So you've carved into another building to create an
No,
access?
so there's what has happened is that there was an original building here that we provided sort of onto the site as a
I think it would have been good to have some kind of drawing that showed like the site before and the site after.
Right.
'Cause it is a little confusing.
That's an existing, is this a follow-up
Oh,
question?
yeah, of course.
That's, the gray area is an existing building.
No, so there was, it's a house, sorry, there was an existing building on the site, and what is here is housing that for the original population here, so we've made sort of like, this is an area that we can build another apartment for, that keeps the same amount of space as the original.
So that's part of your proposal. That's a new design as part of your proposal.
Well, we're acknowledging that there needs to be space there for the original population.
Point to your elevation up there.
Sorry?
You show the tower on the elevation.
Yeah, so this is our building, and this is sort of the existing that we're housing.
It's an existing building?
No.
No, it's a new building, but we're
New building
Sorry.
replacing the housing that is there.
Yes.
But that
And
new,
he does not design it. All he does is make the footprint and allow for access.
can you, on the community center, where's the elevators?
So we have elevators here and here for, to move up the building for the public, and in the back we have 4 service elevators that are used to move goods up and down the building.
So I think one of the really valuable things that you've done is by having the function as the community center during typical times, you've created a sense of familiarity for the local residents because they're going to be using the center, they're going to be using the daycare, they know the people that work the desk. So then when there is an emergency and they go there, they're going to a place that they already know.
Exactly.
And so that feeling of comfort that you've been designing for has already been established and you're building on that. And I think that's a really great idea that you were working with. Some concerns that aren't addressed are sustainability during an event, how you're going to get power, how you're going to get goods delivered. After 9/11, trucks weren't allowed down below 14th Street, so how are you going to get food to these people? After Sandy, as you noted, a lot of power was out, so how is this building going to provide some of those life features to their residents?
Right, understand. So in terms of the program, so on the back, or rather in this service area, so this area back here would contain all the different equipment for the site. One floor would have the generator, such as mechanical equipment, things like that. So that would go up across all the floors, so hopefully we'd be able to have the equipment specifically for if there was a power outage or to help keep the building sustainable.
So the first thing I think you need to do is figure out how to make a successful community center. before it can become a community center that then transitions into a disaster center. Many community centers are designed for that, not in a similar fashion. I think you've got a really big challenge with the levels and so much. You've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 rooms of multi-purpose space, which is, I don't know any community center that has that much space that's unprogrammed. So there's a abundance of space there that is likely unutilized most of the time. It might be that they're set up for this all the time, right? I think you've got a lot of program and a lot of space here, and not enough community function for it. So I'd say go back to the program for the community facility and figure out what can be viable, believable space that can be functioned and utilized throughout the rest of the year. Also, circulation and access is visual access and security is one of the primary things in community center design. Folks at the front desk need to be able to see at least everyone on their floor, and often community centers are very underfunded, and so they typically have very few folks at their front desks and folks running them. So you might have 4 people in the entire building, and that's 4 people to provide visual security and make sure things aren't happening on floors that shouldn't be for, I think, 6, how many floors? 6, 7 floors. So I think you've got a challenge with this program in this spot. So I go back to, community center design and just really understand what makes a successful community center, because it is not just a lot of spaces. There's often a lot of overlap, visual overlap in those spaces, and multi-use, multi-purpose spaces. The other comment I have is you have a site that has potential for light on 3 sides of it. Even though there's a building, what I'm going to say is to the north-ish, you have an alleyway there, and you've chosen to put a big solid bar pochette along that. So you're limiting the light you can have. And in a dense urban space like New York, I would imagine you'd want to utilize and take advantage of as much of that space as you can. So you might consider rethinking that and putting that core kind of more in the middle and having your spaces overlap around the outside so you can really take advantage of some light.
Right, so we're getting light on all sides.
Yeah, I think just to build off of some of the other points, I think what we're missing here is that in-between context. So you went over very well in your presentation, the research, and I think your compassion shows within that, and your understanding of we didn't adequately meet the needs of people either through Katrina or Sandy. We fell short. So what can we do moving forward, and how can we logically address those changes? So I think a lot of your starting point, your research, the duality of a community center is definitely on point. I think what I'm missing here is, what is the context of this neighborhood that you're landing in? I don't know the architectural style. I'm not really convinced of the architecture that you developed. I don't feel like that's a very welcoming facade. It doesn't scream like, hey, come in, it's a great place. It feels a little bit more, closed down a little bit. I don't know what, like kind of an urban detention center is what I meant to say. It doesn't feel like a welcoming place. And so I would have liked to have seen, what are the inspirations around that you're drawing from? How could that architecture have responded to that context? So I think that idea of the community space and its transition, and you've thought a lot about how to compact. I think that was definitely a success of it, is you actually thought about how you can compress the library, the furniture. Looks like you've been researched into, I don't know if that's an off-the-shelf product for the bunk beds, but you put a lot of thought into that. I would like to have seen a little bit more thought in the architecture itself produced.
The reason I ask about the elevators, because it seems to me moving up and down this building is a little bit constrained, and you might want to look at that. You have two elevators, they're separated, they're kind of hidden, and it looks like your public elevator is almost, I kind of construed that as the service elevator. It's kind of really hidden for a community center, and it's back to being welcoming and want people to explore, along with the security that's necessary. So that kind of detail you might want to look at. But the other issue that I have or noticed is that these kind of the restroom needs and functions for a community center, and the restrooms and shower needs and functions for family, you're housing families, right? For families and so on, are really different. And so the sleeping areas and the congregating areas are important. But what you'll find is for families in a distress situation and so on, out of their home, the kind of hygiene and cleaning and showering and routines and elimination of waste and so on has become really, really important.
So you want these things to be clean and like usable?
Yeah, clean and comfortable, and there's some private, you know, of all the places that your family, you want to be private, is doing those kind of tasks.
Right.
And so I say that to say that design is very different from a public restroom for a community center. And so somehow you would need to account for those two.
I see.
I think these have been really good comments about what is a community center and how does it function. And as a woman, I wouldn't go into one of those stairs to walk up a floor. I'd be afraid I'd get mugged in there. It seems to me there ought to be an open stair or a glassed-in stair, at least up to the 3rd floor, because people will walk up 3 floors, and we should be encouraging that.
Right, so we're giving visual access to the stairs.
And then that gives visual access. And I think having 4 service elevators is a huge expense. Those guys are really expensive. That you can bring some of those back in here and have public-sized elevators. Those 2 little guys don't even look like they meet the ADA accessibility code. You should have some big elevators for the public to go up and down. So it's that kind of really understanding the little bits of a building and how they all work, which you'll learn, you know, now that you're graduating. But the other thing is, I'm wondering, like, how many people this will hold in a disaster situation, and how many people actually in the community would need to be evacuated. I'm wondering what those 2 numbers relate to, and that's a question. I'll just make one more comment before I relinquish the microphone, which is that paying for this building will be very expensive, and so looking for ways to pay for the building within the architectural program could be helpful. You're close enough, well, Lower East Side is now the hot area in New York City. Forget Chelsea, forget Soho, forget the Upper East Side. There's a lot of money moving into this area. You could add several more floors if you could get 3 tennis courts on each floor, those would rent out for $300 an hour to people in Lower Manhattan, and that would give you more space if the community is large enough in case of a disaster.
And it would also help make money.
To use, and would help to subsidize. So I think I asked you a question.
So I have my microphone here. Yeah, so in terms of how many people this building can house, right now it's a little over 1,000 people in this center with these many floors. However, you could, using the typical floor, like we said, by adding different spaces like the tennis courts, you could increase the amount of floors, increase the amount of people depending on the population. Specifically, I know that this one center can't house every single person in an area, but what it's doing is it's creating a place that we can put the people who have lost, like in these larger areas that have lost their homes, can live here and be moved out of these places of last refuge where there's just hundreds and hundreds of people. Those areas, as people are able to return to their homes, will empty out of those shelters. But the people who can't return home need a place that they can also, that isn't just like in the middle of a gymnasium. So that's what I was trying to solve with my current solution.
So let me understand. So in a disaster, your facility could accommodate 1,000 people?
Is that
Yes,
that
it's
correct?
current size, yes.
Okay, and then you have 6 showers per gender for 1,000, for, so,
That's what you're saying.
yeah, so
Really that?
Like quintuple the bathroom.
Yeah, you need more.
I think you missed opportunity of making a truly mixed-use building. You have a site that could have retail on the ground floor, for instance. And then within the facade to express some of the different uses, even though, it's going to convert from the community center to the disaster shelter. I mean, this is, someone said detention, but I think it's a little bit like some not so good public housing look.
I see.
And you just need to look at other types of architecture and we don't know what the north facade looks like, for instance, and it was sort of brought up that that's a big blank wall. I think you either, you made something that's sort of symmetrical in massing, that's probably not necessary. You just need to rethink this. And, for instance, some of the, I guess it's reading rooms, like on the third and fourth floor on the east side, maybe those could have been double height exterior terraces. And then brought landscaping that could have, enlivened, is that the shelving? The bookshelves or whatever?
Yes, these are all
Yeah.
shelves.
So things like that, you could have carved this up more. Right now, it's just, there's one template and you just extrude it all the way up. So
I see, yeah.
challenge yourself more.
Yeah, I would echo some of that. I mean, I think the most compelling things to me were the setup of like why, what you're trying to create, and then I was kind of going back and forth between two of the comments, like should it have been a smaller thing, like should it have been a community center so you didn't bite off so much and you just really focused on, I mean, one of the other compelling thing to me was your two precedent ideas. And this idea of kind of being able to like stash stuff and pull things out, and I think had you so there's like that part of it. I wish that would have followed through more. Like I'm looking at your library plan, and like you're saying that this is the like place where everything gets stowed away, but yet you're kind of taking away space with this. So because you kind of got bathrooms in the way, could all of that kind of stashed away? Like
I see what you're saying, so
like
further into it.
I feel like you have this diagram set up and then you let yourself, you didn't like force yourself to live up to that. And I think those little diagrams you did of the kind of toolbox and those things I think were really powerful. But I do think you were competing with the idea of like, are you trying to get as many people in here as possible, or are you trying to solve in a reasonable amount of space like the solution of being able to transform and flex something like this? So you're doing a lot, and it was, and I don't think you kind of hurt yourself on both sides of it.
I'd also add the assembled dormitory unit. So they each have 2 beds, right? But a lot of families are bigger than that.
Right.
And I think there's opportunity to create something where 2 of them can lock together and make
Yeah,
a
so
4.
what you could do is to expand this, you could remove one of the dividers and then just become a larger unit for more people to fit into one.
So I think that's good. The other thing I would say is people they are taken away from their community, and you're allowing the community to sort of come back together here. But I think there's opportunity in how you lay those out, even within those spaces. Right now you've got circulation, unit, circulation, unit, unit. There's a lot of circulation, a lot of kind of wasted space. So if those even pushed to the outsides and you accessed and had one piece of circulation in the middle, you might also start to create some areas where you could create communal space with a group of 3 units or 6 units or something, and you be able to maximize some of the space instead of having these circuitous routes around.
I see, so, great, okay.
Well, Zain, it's great to see this project come to completion. I haven't seen it in a long time. And if I could throw something else into the conversation. So when this transforms into a shelter in a disaster, I'm picturing a water disaster because you talked to us about Sandy. And I'm thinking that I'm thinking about what the environment is going to be like during that disaster. And I'm thinking that even though there's a low risk of evacuation in this area, there is some risk. And I'm wondering if you don't want to design at least the ground floor in a resilient way that would allow it to survive a water disaster, and then to go on from there. So first of all, the ground floor, I think, should be different from what's going on above, because I think, you know, in Katrina and Sandy, the ground floor is very, very vulnerable. And then to go on from there, what about the city's infrastructure and utilities? They're likely to be down. Is this building going to have power during a disaster? Is there any way that you could make this building self-sufficient? You know, you've talked about uses for the roof, and I wonder if there are, you know, other potential uses for the roof. You're way high up there, you're probably above the trees in Lower East Side. Pardon me?
Like solar panels and things like that?
Yeah, although of course during a disaster, you know, there may not be sun, so it may not be so effective. But I think, you know, some sort of forward-looking thought about how to make a resilient building that in itself will be able to survive disasters, because the building itself has to be a survivor. It has to shelter survivors, but it has to be a survivor itself. So just let me keep going with the train of thought for just a second.
Sorry,
I'll turn it back to you. And so I'm thinking about this building as being a kind of active participant, you know, somehow actively taking care of people. It goes back to the transformer idea that Alec was talking about. I also thought that your analysis of the precedents was really, really strong. And I just got this great sense about this kinetic compartment where things are pulling and pushing, and at different times of day, the building itself was unfolding, rolling, you know, doing very kinetic things. And so I want to echo that thought that I think that you could have pushed a little farther beyond, you know, somewhat conventional architecture, to think about this architecture that's both resilient and also changeable, so that rather than spending time pulling things out of storage and assembling with Allen wrenches, you know, perhaps the stuff's already there, kind of folded up, and there's
disassembles.
Yeah, like more of a kind of unfolding process. So I guess my big question is, what is it about the architecture itself that it makes this a shelter, makes it resilient, and makes it transformable?
So for the first part, for where it's the site to be specifically, I placed this building in an area that's marked as a safe location. So this is an area that's well outside of the evacuation zones. So the intent of positioning it there was for this building not to be in the way of disaster, but to be a place that people could evacuate from disaster to. So I understand what you're saying about the idea of making it more resistant to flooding and things like that. That's definitely a concern that I understand now and would develop given more time in the construction.
Yeah, I want to go back to that. It's been now brought up twice, and I'm going to try to say it succinctly. I just think it's a missed opportunity. I mean, I think what you're saying, like, who knows what the next disaster is going to be, and like thinking about New York, thinking about the like power outages, you know, where this building is a shelter which doesn't have power, and of course you could turn on a generator, but why? Like, the thesis to me, like that was a piece of what should have, like that you needed. Like you needed to be able to like say, if there's no power and there's no water and there's no this and there's no that, how does this building function during that time? And I think you have so much program and so much space, like you probably could have fit some of that stuff in there, and it should have shown up in the drawings.
Right, I understand.
Just as an add-on, I think, because you have,
because you have so much additional space, maybe thinking a little bit more about the mixed use would have answered some of that, having co-working space. Obviously, maybe in a disaster, people are going to be coming to the office, but that could be converted, and it's also a way to make money for the community center to help fund it as well. So I think this, I think the thesis is a great thesis. I think there are lots of things that could have been explored a bit further to add on to it, but I think, that the mindset and the tracking of the idea is great. I think we all wanted a little bit more exploration into the building itself, and thinking about it, just about the bathing. Just to drill down on that point, thinking about moms and dads bathing young children outside of a home. You can't put a young child just in the shower and let them bathe themselves, right? I mean,
Right.
there are needs that, family bathrooms, which actually I think could help out at a community center in any event. I think those are the types of things I think you could have gotten into thinking about.
Yeah, that adds information, fixture information should have been part of this too, part of the presentation. We should just throw it around.
Are there any more comments from anybody? Okay, excellent. All right, Zain, here we are. I think you started from a really excellent premise, and you deserve credit for coming up with a theoretical solution that's a no-brainer. I mean, can't believe no one's thought of it. You have to, in order to get past this really dismal status quo that you showed at the beginning of your presentation, of people being loaded up into these stadiums, no privacy, no amenities, and then some people not even making it to the stadium and being out on the street. What you need is a new building typology that is permanent and not just ad hoc, not temporary, not cobbled together. And to give it permanence, you suggest mixed use, a secondary use as a community center. So I think just right off the bat, it was a really good premise, and then you doggedly pursued that premise towards some effective design ideas. I think one of the more successful things was you discovered how versatile orthogonal planning is, that you can, if you want to do compressibility and you want to do these conversions, that you wound up always tending towards orthogonal planning just because it works. You have streamlined access, etc., etc. Also, those the compressibility into the service bar and the two service towers, although I also think it's a cool idea to maybe have a service core, and you should think about that for sure. Yeah, so you've gotten a lot of really, really valuable comments.
Yes, thank you all for the comments. Those are all things that I didn't think about that I need to investigate if I push this forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Things about how do you make this a whole big list of all the comments. But I know some of the salient themes were it has to survive as a community center in order for it to have that permanence. So how do you define the program more specifically to make that community center work? Expanding on the compressibility idea, so it's not just the dormitory units coming out of the wings, but that actually it's a part of the architectural feature. Self-sufficiency, expanding on mixed use. I love the idea that you could bring retail in or rent out some of the stories for various events. Scaling up the amenities seems absolutely essential if you have 1,000 people in there. Surveillance, etc., etc. But again, I think you deserve praise for developing a really strong premise and pursuing it towards something that's a lot better than the status quo.